We've been told, and it's our opinion, of course, that the assassination has now been solved, and that every outstanding or significant aspect of it that was previously unexplained has now been explained. The key to figuring out what happened with President Kennedy, in our opinion, was to go back and start over. In other words, don't accept the Warren Commission's report, don't accept what Gerald Posner says in Case Closed, don't accept the House Assassinations Committee report. We threw all of that stuff out, started over, and under the assumption that a fact is a fact and that anybody should be able to go back and independently check it and verify it, that's the only criteria we had in our analysis and investigation. So I want to stress to you that although some of the stuff you're about to hear today I think will be a little hard to accept at first, I think if you take a little time and go with me over the reasons why, how it happened, is what I'm going to tell you, then I think you'll be in a position to not only check it out yourself, but I think a whole lot of intrigue and mystery will be very clear. Okay, how many of you, first, this is just a curiosity question for myself, how many of you believe there was a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy? Raise your hands. Okay, how many of you don't believe there was a conspiracy? Okay, so everyone in this room believes there was a conspiracy. All right, you're not alone. 90% of all of Americans believe the same thing. And there's nothing wrong with that belief, because based on the data that everyone has had to work with, it's a very valid conclusion. The problem, however, is that the data everyone has had to work with has not been accurate. For example, I'll ask you guys, what is the biggest problem that you have with the assassination? Is the biggest problem with the magic bullet theory? The idea that one bullet can go through two people, cause all those wounds, and end up with, no damage to the bullet? Is that the main reason? Why is it that you guys believe there was a conspiracy?
Witnesses who heard and saw, rifle smoke, flash of light. Oswald had no nitrates, and it seemed improbable for him to be able to do the shooting, as he was not a terrific shot.
Mm-hmm.
It was an impossible shot with one rifle. For him to get down the stairs, drinking a Coke, relaxed, unconcerned.
Sounds like you've read a little bit about it. Yeah. No, you're rattling off a bunch of details, of course, which have been used to build the case that there's a conspiracy. Yes, sir.
There's also the issue of the witness of the deaf mute who...
Ed Hoffman, yeah.
Yeah, who saw the puff of smoke and the rifleman, the two men behind the wall of the grassy knoll.
Okay. So you're referring to Ed Hoffman and witnesses like Gene Hill,
yeah,
who saw men fire at the president and they got away behind the knoll. Okay.
There's also the Secret Service agent who
Didn't belong there.
who didn't belong there, who identified himself to the policeman, and then no one could ever
Figure out who he
figure out
was.
who he was again.
Right. Okay, and you, sir?
And then there's also the driver who stopped the vehicle right at the scene.
Mr.
Which is
Greer,
the
the
most-
Secret Service
Yeah,
agent.
which is the most illogical thing, according to their training, to do.
Right.
It was as though he was saying, if you missed him on the first two, I'll slow down so you can do it right.
Mm-hmm.
One is that there's the evidence suggesting the final shot from the front being from a fragmenting bullet. There was also a report that I saw on I think it was on Discovery investigative reports. They had enhancements of a photograph showing a man in a uniform who then came forward and he said, I took some pictures, they were confiscated from me, and it was a man who came from behind me dressed in a police officer's uniform who had a big gun, and he threatened me to turn over my camera.
That was Gordon Arnold, the soldier
believe-
that was on leave, that hit the dirt because a shot had come over past his right ear, I think.
Actually, I believe it may be someone, he said he was standing directly in front of the grassy knoll
Right.
and felt a bullet whiz past his ear, and then someone came from the same direction carrying a rifle and took his camera away from him.
Right.
What's interesting is that there was a picture taken from the opposite side of the street. Once enhanced, seems to show not only the assailant, the so-called badge person,
Right.
but this man in the uniform.
Yeah, once you enhance the photo, he's been called Badge Man because it looks like he's wearing a Dallas
Correct.
police uniform.
But I'm also saying that this witness seems to be identified as well, a man in a military uniform who was then sent to Alaska and never heard from again until now.
Right. We start with, in our study of the assassination, let's go ahead and talk about, first of all, the presidential motorcade route. This is an area that we studied quite a lot, and it's the first chapter in the book that we're working on. It turns out that the presidential motorcade route had been determined by one of President Kennedy's advisors, and it was a few days before the actual assassination took place where they had actually pinpointed the actual route that was going to turn in front of the depository. The original route that was planned called for the Main Street to be used instead of Elm, but when they discovered there was a curb in the way and that the limousine couldn't go over the curb, that's when it was altered at the last minute. So as far as the route is concerned for the motorcade, it was obviously set, it was approved by the White House, and then of course President Kennedy was in the limousine and then he was killed. Now, what about the assassination itself? We know that at least 3 shots were fired, and we know that at least 1 shot hit Governor Connally. We know that at least 2 shots hit President Kennedy. And we, of course, know the outcome of what happened to President Kennedy. Now, what I would like to do is go over the assassination itself and debunk some myths about it. Then we'll immediately jump to the moment after the assassination where people, like you mentioned, Gordon Arnold and Gene Hill and Ed Hoffman, had seen other people behind the fence and the evidence for a grassy knoll gunman. So let's get our volunteers here. President Kennedy is going to sit here. Jackie Kennedy is going to sit here. Governor Connally here, and his wife here. Get one thing real clear. If you look in most of the assassination literature, you will see a diagram that is labeled the remarkable path of the magic bullet, okay? And what it shows you is it shows President Kennedy sitting in front of Governor Connally sitting in front of President Kennedy. And it shows how the bullet, you know, went down from the angle of the depository, made a right angle turn after exiting out of Kennedy, then went into Governor Connally's back. Dr. Cyril Wecht, who's a forensic pathologist and the chief coroner for Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, is the person who originated that drawing. It's also the same drawing that you see in the movie JFK, and it has appeared in numerous books. That drawing is wrong, and here's why. In the presidential limousine, the seats are not aligned directly in front of each other. You can look in any photograph taken of the limousine, and even to today that is true. Because in the very back seat here, you have the back seat, which is quite long. In the front, you have what are called 2 jump seats, which are temporary seating if in the event that extra people are riding in the limousine. They are aligned slightly to the left. When Dr. Wecht looked at the Zapruder film, and it didn't even notice, and you can see when you look at it that the seats are not aligned in front of each other, he took a 2-dimensional image, the frame for the Zapruder film, did a drawing of it. He should have converted it into 3D space when he did his drawing. That would have shown the correct alignment. So no matter whether there was 1 gunman or 2 or 3 who killed Kennedy, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is that the angle that he used was wrong, and the bullet did not make a right angle turn. The idea that a bullet would make a right angle turn is ridiculous anyway, but I just want you to know that that drawing is not correct. Okay? And we have an issue of whether Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle could go ahead and fire 3 shots in 6 seconds. That is, of course, very hard to do. In fact, the truth is no marksman to this day has ever duplicated the feat that Oswald was convicted in his death of having done. The Mannlicher Carcano rifle that Oswald used was manufactured during World War II, and the ammunition that he used had also come from World War II as well. It was surplus ammunition. So not only was the ammunition a couple of decades old at the time, but the rifle itself took a fair amount of practice in order to be comfortable with it. And one thing Oswald was noted for, and this is based on everyone who knew him, from his wife to his friends, is he always was seen working the bolt. In fact, his friends reported quite a lot that Oswald had forearm muscles that were pretty strong, which is the muscles needed to work the bolt a lot. So Oswald was always working this bolt all the time. He would sit on his patio and dry fire and test. So when the Warren Commission took the Mannlicher Carcano rifle or other equivalent rifles and handed it to a marksman who was a great shot but had never used the rifle before and said, here, fire at a stationary target and see if you can bang off 3 shots in 6 seconds, well, that's a stupid test to do. Scientifically, it's worthless. The person has to be comfortable with the rifle, especially the bolt, because that's where your time is going to be eaten up. And then Kennedy wasn't sitting still. Although the limousine did slow down, its average speed was about 11 miles an hour, and it was a moving target that was receding away. So to fire at a stationary target with a strange rifle is not a valid test, but that's what they did anyway. Well, let's debunk another myth. I will show you evidence which anyone has yet to refute that there weren't 6 seconds in the assassination. The total time was about 8.5 seconds. Now, the 6-second myth is courtesy of the Warren Report. The Warren Commission concluded that no assassin would have fired at the presidential limousine until after the limousine cleared the trees that were obscuring the view from the 6th floor depository window down on the presidential limousine. So that translates into roughly frame 181 of the Zapruder film. Since the Zapruder film is already 181 frames into its time sequence, if you will, the assumption that nobody fired until after the limousine cleared the trees meant that there was only about 6 seconds to get the job done. We'll now see evidence very shortly that the first shot occurred around frame 160, or frame 161, and if you add up the total time there, it equals roughly 8.5 seconds. Now, one other thing too, it may be 3 shots in 8.5 seconds, not 6, but it's not cocking the bolt 3 times in that time frame. You have to remember that the first shot is already ready to go. So within 8.5 seconds after the first shot, Oswald or the assassin only has to work the bolt twice. That's it. And you can actually take your time a little bit. In other words, 8.5 seconds to cock the bolt twice and fire can be done without being in too much of a hurry. Yes?
Okay, it's already cocked. The first shot has to come when the view is unobscured by the trees. So
That's
you
correct.
can't add the 2 seconds on based on the presumption of his firing 3 shots in 8 seconds. He wouldn't fire 2 seconds into the trees.
No. What we're establishing and what I'm going to show you is evidence that the first shot occurred before the limousine went under the tree.
That's all right.
The second and third shots occurred after it had emerged from the tree,
That's
whereas the
exactly
Warren
right.
report said all 3 shots occurred after it had cleared the tree. And since we know the moment of the fatal shot, that's not disputed. That's where the 6 versus 8.5 second window occurs. Yes, sir.
Why wouldn't Oswald fire dead on when the limo was coming down Houston Street, before it took the turn on Elm?
Because if you...
As the target was getting progressively closer to him.
Because if he had missed, the limousine could have sped right past the depository. And if you're going to ambush somebody, the best time to shoot them is as they turn down and they're receding away from you, because they can't get away from you. They may speed away, but you can still get off 2 or 3 more shots before the target is out of sight. If he had missed the first shot, they would have sped directly past the depository and President Kennedy would still be alive. But once he committed to that turn, there was a stretch of road that he was an open target. So even if the first shot or even the second shot missed,